So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And I am so thrilled you're joining today because today marks day 2 of our epic Nature for All Festival. So I am the new incoming Canadian coordinator of the Nature for All Global Nature Network, over 500 organizations around the world committed to making sure that you are educated about the natural world, inspired by it, and fall in love with it every bit as much as all of us representatives of amazing organizations around the globe. So thank you guys for joining in, and I'm so excited to dive in with today's presentation. Now, over the last couple of years, I've had the pleasure of bringing in one of Canada's young stars in science communication, and that is Peter Soroye. He has done amazing programs on pollinators, climate, his own role as a scientist, and so many more. You can check all of those out on our YouTube page. But he's got a new gig, the best gig, the coolest job in the world, better than mine even. He is the Assessment and Outreach Coordinator for the Key Biodiversity Areas at the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, which means he gets to assess and learn more about and showcase some of the most amazing places in Canada protecting thousands of incredible species. We've got so many Canadian classes in today. If you guys are in love with wildlife, if you love getting out in nature, Peter is going to do a great deal of work in the years to come, making sure that you have incredible nature to visit and play in every single day. So without further ado, I'll stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Peter to blow your mind over the next 20 minutes, and I look very forward to your questions. Peter, take us away, man.
Hey everybody, it's great to be here. I'm so happy to join Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants and to join this incredible festival going on for Nature for All. So thank you for the invitation, and thanks everybody for joining today, whether you're in the classroom or on the YouTube. I hope everybody is excited to travel across Canada today and visit some of the most incredible natural places across our country. So my name is Peter Soroye. I'm coming from Ottawa, Canada. That's where I live. That's where I work. That's where I get to go outside and play around most often. And this is traditional and unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory that I'm very happy to be on. I work, like Jesse mentioned, for Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, which is an incredible organization. They even gave me a free hat, which is so dope. Always work for places that give you free hats. And Wildlife Conservation Society Canada is a conservation organization that works to protect and preserve our beautiful places and animals and plants and people across the planet, but especially across here in Canada. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I do with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada for the Key Biodiversity Area program. And we're going to start off by learning about biodiversity. We're going to start off, and then we're going to talk about key biodiversity areas, what they are, why they're important. And then we're going to actually visit some of these places, some of these key biodiversity areas across the country, from coast to coast, and then to the middle of Canada as well. So we're going to start off by learning what is biodiversity. So some of you might know this already, but for those who want a refresher, what is biodiversity? I think explaining biodiversity is easiest to do with by visualizing it, by looking at it. And biodiversity is quite simply the variety and the insane number and differences and variation of life across the planet. In other words, it's the spice of life. Biodiversity is all of the different types of plants that we have, all the different types of flowers, all of the different types of bison or wolves or reptiles or amphibians. It's all of the different shapes and forms and behaviors that life takes across our country and across the entire globe. And so it's something really special. It's really important. The ecosystems that we look around in, the landscapes that we drive through or that we hike through or that we camp in, the food that we eat and the air that we breathe and water that we drink, all depends in some way or another on the biodiversity across our planet. And so it's really important to not only cherish this biodiversity and enjoy how dope it is, but it's also really important for us to live to our fullest. And so it's really important to cherish this biodiversity across the planet. One of the ways that we can help protect this biodiversity, and one of the things that I work on at Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, are these key biodiversity areas. And what are key biodiversity areas, or KBAs as we call them? To say it simply, key biodiversity areas are important places for this biodiversity. When we think about all of the variation of life and the different forms that life takes, key biodiversity areas are the sites and the places that are really important for different pieces of this biodiversity. So these key biodiversity areas can be underwater, they can be rivers, they can be lakes, they can be caves, they can be forests or jungles or meadows or fields. Whatever type of form that these key biodiversity areas are, they're just really important places for different pieces of biodiversity. And if we lost these places, if we lost these key biodiversity areas, if we lost any one of them, we would be losing a really important piece of the ecology and the evolutionary puzzle of life and the history of life in our country and across our planet. So these areas are really important, and mapping them out like we do at WCS Canada is one really cool way to look at the importance of nature across our country. When we think about key biodiversity areas and different types of them, let me show a couple of examples because I think that'll help illustrate what these places are across the country. Some of these places are places that are the only home for a species in Canada. So I have on the right here, or on the left, sorry, a Vancouver Island marmot. And this is a really adorable little mammal. It's almost like a groundhog. It looks pretty similar to a groundhog, but I think a million times cuter and just look at those eyes. It just looks amazing. But this Vancouver Island marmot is only found in a handful of places on the planet, all of them on Vancouver Island in BC. So these places where it lives are really important places for the biodiversity of Canada. If we lost these places, we would lose the entire species, all of these Vancouver Island marmots. So these places where it lives are key biodiversity areas. They're really important. In a similar way, on the left, we have this dinosaur-looking whooping crane. These are really big birds. They're really cool-looking birds. They, I think, look like dinosaurs, and that's so cool to me. And these birds breed in only a single place in Canada. They breed in a couple other places across North America, but in that little orange dot at the very top of Alberta that you can see on the map that I have on the screen here, this is the only place where these whooping cranes reproduce in all of Canada. And so this site is a really, really special place. It's a key biodiversity area for these species. Other examples of key biodiversity areas or places that are really important for biodiversity are places where animals gather together, where they congregate at one part or another of their life cycle. This cave or kind of rock face on the screen might not look very special. It might not look like any type of place that would be important for biodiversity or any type of plant or animal. But in fact, it is. Because if we go inside this cave, we might find dozens or hundreds or sometimes even thousands of bats across this cave. Bats use caves like this for hibernacula. They spend winters here, they spend nights here. And so bats, they're flying across, huge portions of the sky during night while they're active and in the summers. But in the winters, they congregate into these places, into particular caves. And without these caves, without these special places, we would lose entire populations and huge numbers of bats. So these places, these hibernaculum for bats, are often key biodiversity areas. They're really important places for this piece of biodiversity in Canada. So another example of key biodiversity areas that we see across the country are places that are really important for the life cycles of animals. If you've ever seen a documentary about Africa or about the Serengeti, you'll probably have heard about wildebeest and the incredible migration that wildebeest do across the Serengeti and the plains of Africa. And of course, we don't have wildebeest in Canada, but we do have another type of animal that migrates across huge distances in a similar sort of way. These animals are caribou, and there are a bunch of different types of caribou across Canada. All of them are really important for our ecosystems. A lot of them are really important for people. And these caribou do these incredible migrations in a very similar way to like we see across the plains of Africa. And some of these sites that these caribou visit during their migration are also really important places. They're places where these caribou all come together. They're places that are really important for supporting the entire life cycle of these species during that migration. So some of these places where caribous migrate are also key biodiversity areas. There are a lot of other different examples and different types of key biodiversity areas, and I'm not going to talk about them all today. Instead, we're going to visit a few in just a minute. But just to point out one other type of key biodiversity area that we might have is pointing out really pristine and untouched wildernesses, places where nature is really at its fullest. If you've ever been, camping in a really remote spot, or if you've ever, flown in an airplane and looked out the window and looked at some places that are just like completely untouched, there's no people around them, then you might have seen some of these other key biodiversity areas. They're places that are really rare across the world, because in most of the planet, humans have been messing around with it and modifying it. So these remaining wildernesses are also really important and sometimes really key biodiversity areas. Now that you know a little bit about what key biodiversity areas are, let me just talk about why they're important for a little minute. The reason why it's so important to find these key biodiversity areas in these special places for nature is because the more that we know and the more that we find these areas, the better that we can act and the more biodiversity that we can save. The one thing that all key biodiversity areas have in common, like I mentioned, is that if we lose them, we lose a really important piece of our nature. And so if we can map out these areas, if we can, and we can map them out and we know where they are and we know why they're important, then we can protect the things that are inside of them much better. Sometimes that means making a protected area and a park like Algonquin National Park or Banff National Park, or Algonquin Provincial Park or Banff National Park. Other times, key biodiversity areas can be protected in other ways by the people already there. But whatever we need to do to these places, it's important to know where they are to protect this biodiversity. And like you might know, it's really important to protect biodiversity right now because of things like climate change and pollution and habitat loss. A lot of the nature across our planet is disappearing. And so finding these key biodiversity areas and conserving this beautiful biodiversity is just really, really important to do right now. Key biodiversity areas are just one way that we can do that. So I've been talking a lot about what these key biodiversity areas are, what biodiversity is, and why it's so exciting and cool. But I think the best way to really understand what key biodiversity areas are is to go and visit them. So that's what we're going to do right now. I've picked out a couple of what I think are some of the most exciting and coolest key biodiversity areas across Canada that we're looking at, and we're going to go visit them. So let me just switch what screen I'm sharing so you guys can see, so that we can step into some of these places. And there we go. Okay, so I think you can all see that now. And what we're gonna do is, this is our planet. Let's just spin around and look at this planet because, oh my God, it is just so fantastic looking. And of course, around here is about where Canada is. And I've pointed out 3 KBAs that we can visit if we have time today. But we're going to start off with one in particular. So this KBA is in Atlantic Canada. If anybody's been to the Maritimes, if you've been to New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, then you'll probably have been around this KBA. Well, maybe not that close, but you'll probably have been in the approximate region of it. But this key biodiversity area is on Sable Island. And this is a really small island. It's a pretty innocuous looking spit of land, or spit of land in the middle of the ocean. It looks kind of like a smiley face, which I think is really cool. But if we zoom into this a lot more, you can see it's covered in sand. It's covered in rolling dunes. And to be honest, from the sky, using the satellite images from Google Earth that we're looking at right now, Sable Island doesn't really look like that much, to be honest. But I can tell you it is. It is an incredibly cool place to go. And the best way for me to prove that to you is by stepping onto it. So what we're going to do is step right onto Sable Island. And we're going to zoom right on. And we're on a field trip. We're just going to step onto this island. And immediately you can see how different it looks from this satellite imagery. It's such a beautiful place. It has these rolling sand dunes. It's covered in all of this, beach grass and flowers. There are flowers here. There are freshwater lakes, which is something that is really interesting to see on such a small island in the middle of the ocean. There are freshwater lakes here. And, we're going to walk around, actually. We're going to walk around Sable Island a little bit. and just check some of it out because it's such a beautiful place and it's really worth exploring a little bit. So as we walk around Sable Island, let me tell you a little bit about the things that you might see on this little piece of land, and some of the things that make this place so important. One of the things you might see first, if we were actually on Sable Island instead of just visiting it through a computer, one of the things you might see are the residents. And some of the most popular residents of Sable Island are some of the most popular residents of Sable Island are its horses, actually. Let's step back onto Sable Island quickly. And then I'll talk a little bit more about some of its residents here.
Take your time, man. This is half the fun of video broadcast, trying to get onto an island virtually. See, this is why we all have to go in person. If you go in person, you never go back up to the satellite. That never will happen to you, I promise.
Exactly. All right, so we're back on the island. You can just imagine the crashing waves and the smell of the salt in the air from the ocean. But if we were actually there, we might run into some of the residents of Sable Island. And some of its most famous residents are these horses, the wild horses of Sable Island. These weren't, originally on Sable Island. These horses were introduced to the island by people in about the 1700s, a couple hundred years ago. And now they more or less live on their own. They live without any human intervention. They're wild horses. They're not the best for the native inhabitants of the island, but they're a really big part now of this island's ecosystems and a big part of what makes it special. Some of the other things that are really special about this island are the bees, the other biodiversity across it. And if we go back out to, looking and stepping on this island, you can see a lot of these flowers. And on some of these flowers, you might see some of these bees. This bee in particular is the Sable Island sweat bee. It's a metallic orange sweat bee. It's got these bands of yellow and black. It's honestly really, really cool looking, I think. And it's a bee that's found nowhere else on the planet. You could search, on a million other islands and you would never find this same sweat bee. So it's a really special piece of what makes Sable Island such a special place. There are also just a huge amount of bird biodiversity as well in this island, a huge amount of different types of birds. In fact, over I think over 350 different types of birds that you can find across Sable Island at different times of the year, including these roseate terns, which are these pretty cool looking birds. I love them because it looks like they're wearing hats or do-rags, and I just think that's a really amazing thing for an animal to be doing. And you would also find other types of birds as well. This is an Ipswich sparrow, which is a subspecies of savanna sparrow. And they have these little yellow kind of like eye tattoos across and these spots across their chest. They're really cool looking. And apparently they breed nowhere else other than Sable Island. So really interesting types of birds that you would find there. And of course, one of the other most exciting parts of the island and one of the loudest and smelliest parts of the island are the seals that you find across the dunes and beaches of Sable Island. Sable Island is really special. It's this, like we saw, it's this island in the middle of the ocean. And because it's such a special island and place, it attracts huge numbers of seals. These are gray seals in the picture here. Let's go back to that picture of seals. And sometimes from December to February, when these seals congregate on Sable Island, you can find up to 400,000 gray seals on the island. This is an absolutely insane number. Some people estimate it to be up to 80% of the Western Atlantic population of these gray seals. So it's almost the entirety of seals on the planet in this part of the ocean are heading to Sable Island during the winter to breed and to eat and to just enjoy the rolling sand dunes of Sable Island. And they congregate so much that even the horses have a lot of difficulty stepping through them across the beaches. So this is Sable Island. It's a really beautiful place and a really great place to explore. And I hope you've enjoyed exploring it a little bit here. We're going to jet over to the other side of the country now to visit another key biodiversity area that I think is just as amazing. We're going to visit Tombstone Territorial Park. And this is all the way on the other side of Canada. So we're going from the East Coast, from Atlantic Canada. We're going to cross Quebec, and we're going to cross Ontario. We're going to cross Alberta and Saskatchewan. We're going to go over BC and Kamloops, where I think one of these classes is here. And we're going to go north all the way into the Yukon and to a very special part of Canada and North America called Eastern Beringia. And this is a really unique part of the planet. And Tombstone Territorial Park is a really special place within that region. Tombstone is on the traditional territory of the Trondek, and I'm not going to say those other names because I will absolutely butcher them, unfortunately. But Tombstone is really unique also in that people have been living there and hunting there and living across the space for over 8,000 years, or around that. And so it has a lot of history, a lot of human history, and also just an incredible biodiversity in this area as well. If we look at some of the things that you might see, well, first let's step into Tombstone Territorial Park, just like we did with Sable Island. I think that's the best way to view it, is by stepping into this park. And so let's go down, we'll fly down, and then we'll step right into Grizzly Lake and just take a look around us at this beautiful place, this beautiful key biodiversity area that holds so much unique and special and fabulous pieces of nature in it. And what a view. Oh my God. Okay, well, maybe not that. We'll ignore that, pan the other way. But what a view, an incredible place. And it holds just an amazing selection of biodiversity around it. If we zoom back up and we'll plop down again somewhere else here. But Tombstone Territorial Park isn't just a beautiful place. It's also a place where you can see a huge amount of biodiversity. Some of the, I think, cutest biodiversity that you might run into in Tombstone Territorial Park. Oh, now it's winter, and you can see it's just as beautiful a place in winter as well. But there's a really cool selection of animals and plants and birds and other things that you would see in Tombstone. So this is another picture of within the park. And what Tombstone Territorial Park is, what's particularly special about it is the mammals within it. So this is a picture of a collared lemming. It's not necessarily the collared lemming that you would find in Tombstone Territorial Park, but it's a really beautiful and adorable collared lemming. And I just had to show a picture of these lemmings. They change coats and in the winter as well, so they're really cool in that way. And in Tombstone Territorial Park, there's a particular species of lemming that is found nowhere else on the planet. The Mount Ogilvy collared lemming is such a rare mammal, such a rare animal, that I couldn't even find a picture of it. These pictures are of a different species of collared lemming because the one that lives in Tombstone Territorial Park is so rare that I could not find a photo. But they're an incredibly unique piece of biodiversity and of life on the planet that is held within this area. You'll also find collared pika, which are very similar to lemmings, but again, just adorable in a different sort of way. And this one is just screaming into the void and just being absolutely cute. And you'll find a lot of bigger biodiversity as well. Tombstone Territorial Park is a place where you'll find caribou as well. And it's a place where you'll find things like grizzly bears and wolverine. So it's full of a lot of really special and just terrific pieces of life that are really rare across the globe and quite common in Tombstone. You'll also find an incredible amount of birds as well, not as much as the site we'll see in just a minute, but in Tombstone you'll find over 130 different types of birds, including one like this harlequin duck, which is probably one of the snazziest and best dressed ducks that I've ever seen in my life. So Tombstone is a very, very special place and a really important key biodiversity area, and a really, high on a lot of people's bucket lists, I think, because it's such a really cool place. We're going to leave Tombstone now, and we're going to quickly, in this upside down version of how we usually look at Earth, we're going to head to the last key biodiversity area that I want to visit. One that is probably a lot closer to most of you, because I know most of you are in Ontario right now. And so we're going to visit this key biodiversity area here in Long Point, Peninsula. And Long Point is in Ontario, right very close to the US border, near Toronto, which is right here, near London, which I think is right here, and near Niagara Falls. And so right here is Long Point Peninsula and Marshes Key Biodiversity Area. This is another really special place of the planet. And what's particularly special about Long Point are the birds that you find here. You find a lot of birds in Long Point that you never find in the numbers elsewhere in Canada, and some birds that you rarely find elsewhere in Canada at all. And so it's a really special place. It's part of the traditional territories of the Atawandaran, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and again, a really long history of people living in this area for a very, very long time. And it's also a beautiful looking area. It's filled with, it's this kind of sandy spit that like jets out into Lake Ontario, into Lake Erie, sorry. And it's filled with all of these freshwater marshes along it. So you look at the wetlands that are in here, and it's just a really exciting place. And within Long Point, you'll find, a huge diversity of birds, things like mergansers, things like tundra swans. This is I believe a ruddy duck, which is, I think, this is a redhead, another type of waterfowl, and this is a ruddy duck. And so you'll find a lot of species like these in numbers that you'll find nowhere else in Canada, and even in the planet. So it's a really special place for that, and a place where you'll also find a lot of rarer birds as well, like king rail, like northern Sawi owls, and also a place where you'll find animals as well, or non-bird animals, like spiny soft-shell turtles, which are really cool pieces of biodiversity that are not very common in Canada as a whole, but are found within the unique habitats and landscape of Long Point Peninsula and Marshes. So Long Point is a really special place, and before we go, we have to step on it as well, and just take a look at this beautiful area. So we're going to step down in the middle of Long Point, and just take a look at it from the bird's perspective, or from the ground nesting birds perspective. And so you can see it's a beautiful place to sunbathe. It's, again, not too different from Sable Island. You have a lot of these rolling dunes and grassy and grasses along here, but you have a lot more trees. You have a lot more diversity of habitats than we saw on Sable Island, and we know just beyond these trees is a lot of wetlands and marshes, and other really, really cool places. So this is a really unique place for birds, and one that is not too far from a lot of people in Canada, near Toronto and in southern Ontario. So now we're going to go back. We're going to leave these sites, unfortunately, but you can visit them at any time. But for now, we're going to jet back to our PowerPoint, and I'll just finish up a little bit here. So I wanted to show a diversity of these key biodiversity areas, a mix of different key biodiversity areas that we have across the country, because I think it's important to look at this different kind of selection of sites, and I also think it's really cool because it shows from Sable Island, which is a really remote place, to Tombstone, which is again not a place that a lot of people will be able to visit, and Long Point, which is a place right close to where a lot of people live. It shows the difference in where KBAs are across the country. Right now at WCS Canada and with our colleagues at Birds Canada and NatureServe, we're identifying about over 700 different key biodiversity areas across the country, different places that hold some really special piece of nature, and some different special places for animals and plants and fungi across Canada. And there might be a KBA right near you. So I know that's the case for me. I live in Ottawa, like I mentioned. And so here's a picture of Ontario and Quebec and Ottawa. Here's a little zoom in again to Ottawa, and you can see all of these orange shapes here are different key biodiversity areas, in particular for birds, but different key biodiversity areas that hold a really important piece of nature. And right in the middle of Ottawa, literally next to the downtown core, there's a really interesting key biodiversity area that holds a lot of diversity and is a really important place for some bird species here. And it's a really cool place to visit. It's not a place that I knew about before I started working here, but now I've been there a couple of times, and it's a really interesting place to go to see some rarer birds and to see some really cool aggregations and really cool groups of birds come all together. So I'd really recommend, if you're interested in finding really cool places for nature, if you're interested in seeing places that are holding really incredible things, then visit our website at kbacanada.org. Visit the maps that we have there of the KBAs that we're working on for birds and for other types of biodiversity. I'd check them out and try to visit one that's near you, because they're full of really cool things, even in the winter. It's not too late to visit them in the fall and winter right now. And whether you're in Ontario or BC, there might just be a KBA that's within a short drive of you to go visit. So on that note, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed being able to visit some of these sites. And I'd really recommend checking out our website if you want to learn more, and visiting some of those maps as well to see some of these other cool places across Canada. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was fantastic, man. And again, all our folks on YouTube and live highlighted the fact that Google Earth is such an amazing tool to explore. Honestly, this is something that when we were kids simply did not exist. Like that, the opportunities for classrooms now is amazing. And if you want to be a little more low tech, a globe, a map, all good things, great ways to explore the world around you. So I'm thrilled to dive in with questions. If you want to come out of screen share so you can see us again, have a bit of a conversation, that's great. I know we've got a bunch of folks joining on YouTube, Miss Gray, we've got Miss Huxley, Miss Rose, and others. Please do feel free to share questions in the chat. But I want to begin by going to Miss Trampleasure, one of our most active teachers over the last few months. So Miss Trampleasure is joining us today in London, our closest one to our Long Point KBA. One of our most active teachers over the last few months. Miss Trampleasure is joining us. There we go. A little delay.
Okay. We're a little loud in here today. This is a great presentation. Thank you so much. Okay. Just a quick question. We're wondering how you go about having a location identified as a KBA, because we're really close to Westminster Ponds, which is an ESA, an environmentally significant area in London, Ontario, and we have a lot of very unique species here and urban pressure around our area. So we love this presentation, and I'm going to use this as a teaching tool with the help students next week. But we're just wondering, how do you go about actually having a designation as a KBA?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. And it's something that we're very much in the process of doing right now, is identifying these areas. We have regional coordinators. We have scientists on the ground in Ontario and BC, and across the prairies and in the north as well. And so these regional coordinators or scientists on the ground are the ones who are really identifying these places. They're not necessarily going there, but they're talking to the experts in these regions. They're talking to the people who live there. And based on our kind of big data, we have a lot of information on where there are threatened species, where there are rare species, and where species congregate together. And so we're starting to identify, based on that, where some of these important areas are. We're not able to catch all of them. Our data isn't perfect. And so it's really important for us to talk to people who live in these places, and to people who know the animals and the plants and the mushrooms and fungi across Canada really well. And so if you have an area that you think is a KBA, please do reach out to me. Visit our website and you can find my email. I'm sure we can throw it up on the screen as well. And I'm happy to chat more. If there's a place you think that is really special and that you think might be a KBA, let's talk about it and let's figure out if it actually is or not.
Fantastic. One of the things you mentioned in your program, and I know we can follow up on this later, is this idea of a place where animals go to gather. And I just want to highlight for our classes, in Manitoba, not too far from Winnipeg, is the largest gathering of snakes anywhere on the planet. They come out every single year. I don't know if that's a KBA. Maybe you can answer that later, but it's a really special, unique place that everyone should know about. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the ones we have on the list. It's on the short list of places to look into next.
Nice. Mr. Turner's class, unmute your mic. You're joining us in Thunder Bay today. So nice to have Thunder Bay groups, and take us away, guys.
Okay, we have Angelo here who has a question.
In KB areas, what's the average amount of wildlife in each one?
Oh yeah, that's a really cool question, and one that changes so much. A lot of these KBAs hold just a really hold a really above average amount of species, whether it's in the number of species or the different kinds of species that you find in these areas. It's hard to put a number on it because in some places like Sable Island, you can expect to find much different numbers of species than in Long Point, for example. I can tell you, so it's a hard thing for us to measure, but some of these places hold a really high numbers of species. Some of them hold much lower numbers of species as well. A lot of the areas that we look at hold just a single species, but or relatively low numbers of species, but it has one in particular that is just really special. But a lot of them hold an above average number of amount of diversity. So for example, places like Sable Island had 130 different types of birds. In Long Point, you have even higher numbers of birds that you might regularly find there. So they can be just absolutely packed with different types of species and with numbers of species as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad Sable Island was on your list. The horses are what I know it from, but just the idea of the biodiversity and the seals is wild to me. So cool. And again, for our Ontario classes, some of the juts outs of land, Point Pelee, Long Point, that go into Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, are some of the most bird-rich places in the planet. Like, I mean, it's not just for us that it's special; it's for Earth, and that's such again a testament to the KBA program and all the work that you guys are doing to protect them. So, let's head to BC. Kamloops, Miss Paulson's class. Unmute your mic, and then I'll take a few from YouTube as we wrap up our thing here. Yeah, unmute on the bottom of the screen, and you're all good. Perfect.
Hey, I have a student who has a question. Come here, London. You have to look at the camera on the other side.
Hey, London.
Come in.
Hi.
What kind of plants do the horses eat?
On Sable Island.
Oh, what kind of plants do the horses eat, Peter?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know horses enough to know that for sure, but I think they probably eat the beach grass and the other types of plants that are along the island. They must find a lot to eat because they've lived there for a really long time, completely on their own. Humans don't help them at all. They're completely wild, and they have a bit of an impact on the rest of the animals that live there. But in general, things are getting along pretty fine on the island, as far as I know.
I'm going to look up and see if there's anything special, but that's probably the exact answer, but I'll try and keep that as we're getting our other questions here. Miss Huxley's class joining us in Southfields Village Public School. They were set to join us on StreamYard. A little bit of tech difficulties had happened with virtual programs. They want to know, how long have you been teaching about nature and biodiversity personally, and what was the draw of this field to you, as if your passion wasn't tested enough?
Thank you. I've always loved nature. When I was younger, my parents brought me and my brother and my sister out camping. We would go to Algonquin Provincial Park a lot. We would go to other smaller campgrounds a lot. And it would be a fun time to spend with family. It would be a fun time to be outdoors and to be alone as well and see just a lot of really cool, things, Canada loons and a lot of other, black bears and special pieces of nature. So I've always been really captured by it. I've always loved National Geographic magazines and flipping through and looking at the more exotic parts of the world and more remote places. So that's always been really important to me. And when I learned about what humans were doing to the planet, how humans were causing things like climate change and habitat loss and pollution and things that humans were doing to cause this biodiversity to disappear, it became really important to me to try to save it. And so I became a scientist. I spent a lot of time in school, in university, learning about different ways that we can protect our planet, different ways we can figure out what we need to do and where we need to do it. And I also like to spend a lot of time talking about that as well. I think I've been talking about conservation for probably in a big way for the last 3 or 4 years. And I love going into the classrooms because people get so excited about it and they're not afraid to get excited about it. And I think that's awesome. And it's just really important, I think, to inspire people to want to protect our planet a little more, because I think if more people knew about some of the amazing things that we find in Canada and across the planet, there would be no question that everybody would want to do everything they can to try to save it and make sure it's there forever.
That is a beautiful message. And again, what you guys are trying to do with this outreach at Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada and with the KBAs, you can only really be vested in protecting something if you know it and love it. Ideally, of course, you get to experience it yourself. And that's why we like to focus on the fact that getting out in nature is so important. But again, if it's virtual, if you never get the chance to visit Tombstone Territorial Park, now you have the opportunity to learn about it, you know about it, you recognize its value. And that's such an important part of what we're trying to do here with conservation. Peter, we've got time for 2 more questions. Time flies and you're having fun. I'm going to pick them at random from our YouTube friends. Live classes, I will make sure you have Peter's email if you want to bug him after this fact, and I think a lot of them already do. Melanie Rose joining us in Guelph, Ontario today. They want to know what types of animals are in and around the Ottawa River. You've highlighted this in a backyard bio program, but I'm really curious, what lives in the capital?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get to spend a lot of time. I'm so happy I get to spend a lot of time up and down the Rideau River and the Ottawa River and exploring it. There are so many birds. For one, it's one of the most obvious things that you'll find. Things like herons. Sometimes you'll find things like egrets, which are these really big, exciting birds to find and come across. You'll find a lot of really colorful birds, from yellow warblers, which are really common, but like little pieces of sunshine that fly along the edges of the river. Things like waxwings, which are super colorful. You'll find things like, different waterfowl. Seagulls aren't always the most exciting. Different types of gulls aren't always the most exciting, but they're in such numbers sometimes that you can't help but just wonder at how they do it all. On the ground, there's a lot of different types of plants. A lot of the plants that you find in the middle of Ottawa are introduced plants from Europe and Asia and other parts of the world, but every now and then you'll find a plant that is native to North America, and that's always really special. They're always really bright, really colorful, and regardless of where they're from, they're usually pretty beautiful to see. And across the banks of the Ottawa River, often there are a lot of pretty rare plants as well, at least rare in our region. Different things like sedges and quillworts, which aren't super exciting to see unless you're like really interested in plants. And if you are really interested, then they're really exciting to see and really cool to look at. Yeah, a lot of different pieces of nature. What's I think most exciting is that you can go and see them almost any time, whether it's winter, fall, spring, summer. There's always something to see and something really cool to enjoy and look at.
You're one of the only speakers that comes on and consistently highlights winter wildlife. It's not gone. You can leave your house, just put on the right clothes. It makes a world of difference. Peter, this has been such a fun program. What I want to do is make sure that people have all the resources they need to keep learning going, and then I'm going to share one final question to wrap us up. So I've been sharing these throughout the broadcast, everyone. I really encourage you to go to the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada's website, kbacanada.org. Check out the amazing work that they're doing there. They are on social media as well. And Peter highlighted some really cool stuff in terms of our KBA areas across Canada. So IBA, these are bird-focused areas. You can check that out. A little unwieldy, but you can type that in if you want to get it off, and I'll make sure it's on our YouTube chat as well. And kbacanada.org/Canada, KBA's in progress. Now, many of you have been talking about emailing Peter, and I know there's more questions that we could possibly take. So he said it. Peter Soroye at wcs.org. Bug him. Send him that message at the end of the program. You may live to regret that, but it's a good problem to have. One final question. This is coming in from Miss Gray's class, and it's the question we always like to end in conservation programs. How can we protect these areas? So our classes today across Canada, the US, beyond, what can they do to help these areas?
Yeah, great question. And I think one of the best things you can do to help protect these areas is making sure you go to them, you visit them, you spend time in them, making sure you're enjoying them as well, making sure you're making it clear to other people, to your parents, to your friends, to your family that you really enjoy these areas and that they're really important. If people understand how important these areas, how cool they are, how exciting they are, then like we said, you can't help but want to protect these places once you realize that. One of the things you can do as well that's actually really helpful for conservation is using community science apps. iNaturalist is an amazing app and website and program that lets you take pictures of different animals and plants and mushrooms and other things, and it even tells you what these things are. And it'll help you identify these animals. It'll help you find out more about them and what they do. And it also collects a lot of information for researchers and scientists to use. So the information that iNaturalist collects is information that we use for the KBAs to help identify them. It's information that scientists use to help figure out what's happening to animals from climate change and from habitat loss. And so using things like iNaturalist isn't only ways to learn more about the world, but it's ways to help save it as well. And of course, like you already said, visit WCS Canada and KBA Canada and find out all of the other exciting things that we're doing in the ways that you can participate.
Awesome. I certainly hope I'll make sure all our classes that registered have those links so you can check those out in your email in the not too distant future. Seek and iNaturalist are incredible apps. We use them for backyard bio, as you well know. Such an amazing tool for students. In fact, some of our classes today use these last May. Get ready for this May coming up. And Peter, as you know, we end every broadcast by bringing in our friends to say a big thank you and farewell. So Mr. Turner, Madame Paulson, and Ms. Tram Pleasure, join me in saying thank you.
Okay, we're live, guys.